The history of the philosophy of science from the early 20th century to the 21st century encompasses a range of ideas, theories, and debates that have profoundly shaped our understanding of scientific knowledge and practice. This period witnessed significant transformations in the philosophy of science, reflecting broader developments in science, technology, and society. At the turn of the 20th century, the philosophy of science was heavily influenced by the logical positivism of the Vienna Circle, a group of philosophers and scientists including Moritz Schlick, Rudolf Carnap, and Otto Neurath. Logical positivism, or logical empiricism, sought to establish a scientific foundation for philosophy by emphasizing the importance of empirical observation and logical analysis. The central tenet of logical positivism was the verification principle, which stated that a statement or hypothesis is meaningful only if it can be empirically verified or is logically necessary. Logical positivists aimed to eliminate metaphysics and speculative philosophy, which they viewed as meaningless. They advocated for the use of formal logic and the empirical methods of the natural sciences as the basis for all meaningful statements. This approach significantly influenced the development of the philosophy of science, promoting a view of science as a rigorous, objective, and cumulative endeavor. However, logical positivism faced several challenges and criticisms. One of the most significant criticisms came from Karl Popper, an Austrian-British philosopher of science. Popper argued that the verification principle was too restrictive and could not adequately account for the practice of science. He proposed falsifiability as a more appropriate criterion for scientific theories. According to Popper, a theory is scientific if it can be tested and potentially falsified by empirical observation. This emphasis on falsifiability shifted the focus from verification to the critical testing of hypotheses, highlighting the provisional nature of scientific knowledge. Popper's ideas marked a departure from the inductivist view of science, which held that scientific knowledge is derived from the accumulation of empirical observations. Instead, Popper argued that scientific progress occurs through a process of conjectures and refutations, where bold hypotheses are proposed and subjected to rigorous testing. This approach underscored the dynamic and tentative nature of scientific theories, which are always open to revision in light of new evidence. In the mid-20th century, the philosophy of science underwent further transformations with the emergence of Thomas Kuhn's ideas. Kuhn's landmark book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, published in 1962, challenged the prevailing view of scientific progress as a linear and cumulative process. Kuhn introduced the concept of paradigm shifts, arguing that science operates within paradigms or frameworks of theories, methods, and standards that guide normal scientific practice. According to Kuhn, scientific progress is characterized by periods of normal science, during which scientists work within an established paradigm to solve puzzles and refine theories. However, anomalies or inconsistencies eventually accumulate, leading to a crisis that precipitates a scientific revolution. During these revolutions, a new paradigm emerges, replacing the old one and redefining the field. Kuhn's ideas emphasized the social and historical dimensions of scientific practice, highlighting the role of scientific communities and the non-linear nature of scientific change. Kuhn's work sparked significant debate and influenced subsequent developments in the philosophy of science. His ideas were further explored and critiqued by philosophers such as Emre Lakatos and Paul Feyerabend. Lakatos sought to reconcile Kuhn's insights with Popper's emphasis on falsifiability by proposing the concept of research programs. According to Lakatos, science progresses through competing research programs, each characterized by a hard core of theoretical assumptions and a protective belt of auxiliary hypotheses. Research programs are evaluated based on their ability to predict novel facts and their progressive problem-solving capacity. Feyerabend, on the other hand, took a more radical stance, advocating for epistemological anarchism in his book Against Method, published in 1975. He argued that there is no single scientific method that can account for the diversity and complexity of scientific practice. Feyerabend criticized the idea of methodological uniformity, asserting that science has progressed through a plurality of methods, theories, and practices. His provocative slogan, "Anything Goes," highlighted the need for openness and flexibility in the philosophy of science, challenging rigid methodological constraints. The latter half of the 20th century saw the rise of the sociology of scientific knowledge, which further emphasized the social and cultural dimensions of science. Scholars such as David Bloor, Barry Barnes, and Harry Collins argued that scientific knowledge is socially constructed and shaped by social, cultural, and political factors. The strong program in the sociology of scientific knowledge advocated for a symmetrical analysis of scientific beliefs, treating both true and false beliefs as equally worthy of sociological explanation. This sociological turn in the philosophy of science was accompanied by feminist critiques of science. Feminist philosophers of science such as Sandra Harding, Evelyn Fox Keller, and Donna Haraway argued that traditional science had been influenced by gender biases, and that the exclusion of women and marginalized groups from scientific practice had shaped the production of scientific knowledge. They called for a more inclusive and reflexive approach to science, emphasizing the importance of diversity and the role of social values in scientific inquiry. The philosophy of science in the late 20th and early 21st centuries has been characterized by a pluralistic and interdisciplinary approach. Philosophers have increasingly recognized the need to account for the diversity of scientific practices across different fields and the complex interactions between science and society. This has led to the development of various approaches, including naturalized epistemology, scientific realism, and social epistemology. Naturalized epistemology, advocated by philosophers such as W.V.O. Quine and Philip Kitcher, seeks to integrate the philosophy of science with empirical findings from psychology, cognitive science, and evolutionary biology. This approach emphasizes the continuity between scientific and everyday knowledge, arguing that philosophical accounts of science should be informed by empirical research on human cognition and behavior. Scientific realism, defended by philosophers such as Hilary Putnam, Richard Boyd, and Stathis Sillos, maintains that scientific theories aim to provide a true and accurate representation of the world. Scientific realists argue that the success of scientific theories in predicting and explaining phenomena provides strong evidence for their truth or approximate truth. This view contrasts with instrumentalism, which holds that scientific theories are merely useful tools for organizing and predicting observations without necessarily providing a true account of reality. Social epistemology, as developed by philosophers such as Helen Longino and Miriam Solomon, focuses on the social dimensions of knowledge production and the role of community standards in scientific inquiry. This approach emphasizes the importance of collaboration, peer review, and the critical exchange of ideas in the development of scientific knowledge. Social epistemologists argue that the objectivity of science is achieved through the collective efforts of diverse and critically engaged communities, rather than through the individual efforts of isolated scientists. In recent years, the philosophy of science has also engaged with emerging fields such as data science, artificial intelligence, and the study of complex systems. Philosophers have examined the implications of big data and machine learning for scientific practice, exploring issues related to explanation, causality, and the reliability of algorithmic inferences. The study of complex systems has prompted new questions about the nature of scientific models, the limits of reductionism, and the role of interdisciplinary approaches in understanding complex phenomena. The philosophy of science has also increasingly addressed ethical and political issues, reflecting broader societal concerns about the impact of science and technology. Philosophers have explored topics such as the ethical implications of biomedical research, the social responsibilities of scientists, and the role of values in scientific decision-making. This normative turn in the philosophy of science highlights the importance of integrating ethical considerations into scientific practice and policy. In summary, the philosophy of science from the early 20th century to the 21st century has undergone significant transformations, reflecting broader developments in science, technology, and society. From the logical positivism of the Vienna Circle to the critical perspectives of Popper and Kuhn, and from the sociological and feminist critiques to the pluralistic and interdisciplinary approaches of recent years, the philosophy of science has continually evolved to address new challenges and questions. This rich and diverse field continues to provide valuable insights into the nature of scientific knowledge, the practices of scientific inquiry, and the complex interactions between science and society.